Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us here. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Fireside chat. My name is Elena. I'm a founder of Achievers Hub and co-founder at GDB, and I will be the host of this chat tonight. I've been in the gaming industry for 10 years, and honestly, it already feels like a lifetime to me. But our guest today, legendary game designer and producer Warren Spector, has been in the industry for 38 years already. Am I right?
39 as of this year.
Okay, it's already 39. Okay, so congratulations on another year in gaming and such a fruitful 39 years. Warren worked on such games as Ultima Underworld 2, System Shock, Deus Ex, Thief, Epic Mickey, just to name a few. And currently he is a studio director at OtherSide Entertainment's studio in Austin, Texas. Is it wherever you are right now? Are you in Austin?
I am, but я изучал русский язык несколько лет тому назад, но я ничего не помню. Итак, по-английски, пожалуйста.
Хорошо, это было отлично. Good morning, then. And it was a quite decent Russian, actually. So let's talk about your gaming career. But before we come back to all the amazing games you worked on, let's talk a bit about how this all started. As far as I know, you didn't always want to be a game designer. You mentioned in some interviews that you wanted to be a paleontologist, a lawyer, and you was also a big film geek, and you wanted to be a filmmaker. Can you tell us more about this?
Wow, you went back very far in my childhood. I think every young child wants to discover new dinosaurs, and I was pretty obsessed with them. I used to go to the Museum of Natural History and correct the people giving the tours when they got something wrong, which didn't endear me to them. Yeah, a little while later, I wanted to be a lawyer because I like talking. That was pretty short-lived. And then when I was in high school, I discovered movies. I was obsessive about that. I went to movies 7 days a week. I mean, every single day, and watched movies on television every single night. I would get home from school at about 6 o'clock and go to sleep immediately and wake up at 11 at night and watch movies all night, and then get up at 6 and go to school again. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to direct, write and direct, and I did some animation and wanted to do that. But what I discovered when I got to college was that there were people who were more talented than I was, and figured if there are people more talented than me here in college, I didn't have much of a chance of making it in Hollywood. So I decided I wanted to write about movies and maybe be a script writer, which I did for the next 6 years, I guess. And I was working on my doctorate teaching at the University of Texas, and the chairman of my department one day after a few years took my class away, and I had no idea how I was going to pay the rent or make a living. And out of the blue, I got a call from a guy I had played games with. I'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons and board games for many years at that point. And, I got known in the gaming community here in Austin. And he said, Steve Jackson Games is looking for an associate editor. Are you interested? And I had no way to pay my rent, and I loved games. So, yeah. And I interviewed with Steve Jackson, and for some reason, he gave me a job. I to this day, don't know why. I owe him a debt of gratitude. But I stayed there for 2.5, 3 years, I guess, and worked on a game called Toon, which I'm still really proud of, a cartoon role-playing game. and worked with him on a bunch of other games. But then one day, out of the blue, again, I got lucky. I got a call from TSR, the people who made Dungeons and Dragons, and asked if I wanted a job with them. And so, you know, they were the biggest company in the business, and they offered me a substantial raise. And I looked at my girlfriend at the time and said, "Hey, I'm moving to Wisconsin. Do you want to go with me?" And she said, "Only if we're married." And I said, "Okay." And that's the romantic way I got engaged. But we moved up there, and I worked on some Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the second edition, which dates me, and some Marvel superhero stuff, and did some testing on some computer games that that TSR had licensed. But I looked at those games, and I love the people who made them, and they're friends of mine. So I don't want to say anything bad, but I thought they were simulating the wrong things about role playing. They were simulating the die rolls and the character classes and the ability. I mean, the you know, the characteristics: strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, all that stuff. And I thought to myself, that's role playing, ROLL, not role playing, ROLE. And the important part of D&D was, you know, playing a role, taking on the characteristics of another, well, human or orc or whatever, and playing that role and telling stories with friends. And I met Richard Garriott, who was making the Ultima games. We were on some panels together at conferences, and I would just look over at him on a panel and think, "Holy cow, this guy gets it. He's making the kinds of games I want to make." And so after a while, I was getting a little frustrated at TSR, and you know, there was a day where we were working on a new game system, and I looked down at my hands, and in one hand I had a 20-sided die, and in the other hand I had percentile dice. And I said to myself, if this is the biggest decision I have to make in my professional life, I need to find another profession. And then luck struck again. I got a call from an artist I had worked with at Steve Jackson Games, who was then with Origin, and said they were looking for an associate producer. Was I interested? And I said, "You bet." And for some reason, they gave me a job. And I could go on and tell you the rest of the story, but that's how I actually got into computer games. It was lucky break after lucky break after lucky break.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that you was playing D&D a lot, and I also found information that your first D&D master was Bruce Sterling, an American cyberpunk novels writer, right?
Yeah. Another writer friend of mine, Walton Simons, who anybody who's played Deus Ex may remember as one of the big villains in the game. Yeah, his name is now copyrighted by IDOS, and I'm not sure he's happy about that. But anyway, he invited me to join a D&D campaign, and I had never played before, so I went to Bruce's house. He was the dungeon master for that group and that campaign, and I created a character, Botara Kitan, the samurai who never smiles, based on Buster Keaton, silent film star. And I never looked back. I was blown away. I mean, Bruce, he was and is an incredible storyteller. I mean, his books and novels are incredible. But what hit me that night was that he wasn't telling a story to us. We were telling stories with him. Our group was telling our story, not his. And that was so powerful to me. I mean, I've been on a quest mission ever since, to ensure that everybody in the world has that experience and feels that amazing creative power. And that's what's kept me going for almost 40 years, that we're still not there yet. We're getting closer and closer to giving video game players that same feeling of authorship, of crafting their own experiences. And that's what games can do that no other medium has ever been able to do in the history of humankind. And to me, that means it's what we have to do, not make scripted adventures or cinematic games or arcade games that are nothing more than a way to pass some time. Much as I love all of those games, to be clear, that's not what I want to do. I want to do games that empower players to tell their own stories. And that all started with Bruce and D&D and all of that. I mean, I've often said to my teams and to anybody who will listen, every single day, everybody who makes games should kneel down and face Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and say thank you to Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Because without them, none of us would be here. None of us. So that's kind of been my mission. And it all started with Bruce,
Yeah, that's amazing. So like D&D was a huge inspiration for you throughout your entire career. And what about video games? Did you play any video games before you actually started working in video games? Maybe you remember what was your first console?
Oh yeah, I mean I was obsessive about video games. That was one of the reasons why when I had that epiphany of what kind of dice should I use, I was already thinking about where do I want to go next? And I mentioned Richard Garriott a minute ago. I loved his game. Ultima 4, it's probably not worth playing now, but at the time, it was a revelation. It was incredible because it showed me that games could be more than just killing monsters and grabbing treasure. And so I loved that approach, and I said, wow, games can really be more than video games. Can be more than what they are now. So I thought maybe I should make video games. The other thing I wanted to do was be an Imagineer for Disney. The idea of building location-based stuff and engaging participants, not viewers or users, in a real-world experience, it still has a lot of appeal to me. And I applied for a job as an Imagineer, and I got lucky and got a call from Steve Jackson Games. And I talked to some people at Disney where I would dearly have loved to work. But Steve Jackson Games came through with a job offer first. I was obsessed with video games. So let's go. But to answer the second part of your question, it wasn't just Ultima 4 that I was playing. Another game that just blew my mind was a game called Star Raiders. I'm not sure anybody remembers it, but it was on the Atari 800. I could only afford an Atari VCS, the cartridge games. And ultimately, I upgraded to an Atari 400. But this friend of mine had an Atari 800, which I was jealous of. And he had the biggest television any of us had ever seen, 25 inches. And I walked into his house for a game party one day or one night, and all the lights were off in his living room. It was lit only by the phosphor dots of that TV, which was really cool and kind of mysterious. And there were about 20 of my friends, my adult friends, sitting around this Atari 800 playing this game that I later found out was Star Raiders. And they were entranced by it. And when I got to play, it was a first-person perspective, real-time, 3D space combat game. And I realized that was the first time I had ever felt like it was me in that other world. It wasn't Luke Skywalker piloting that starfighter. It was me. And so that was kind of my second revelation, that games could immerse players in an alternate world and make them feel like they were there, not their character, not some 64 pixel tall puppet that they manipulate, but it was them in the world. And so you put D&D empowering players to tell their own stories together with, hey, this first person perspective, stuff is really powerful in immersing players. You put that together, and that was two of the three things that sort of set me on the course I'm still on today.
Okay, so you joined Origin in 1989, right?
Oh, you had to mention that year, didn't you? Okay.
Yeah, I had to mention the
year. Okay.
Because this is the year when I was born.
I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest guy still, daily involved in making games. Everybody else has moved into management except me.
Isn't it beautiful?
And I'm proud of that. Okay,
yeah,
keep asking your question.
I mean, you should be proud of it. Yeah, a true creator. So 1989. What was the 1989? Was the game development back then very different from what you see right now?
Oh my God, it was everything was different. It was incredible. Let me start with what hasn't changed. Making games is incredibly hard. I mean, if you're not passionate about it, and if you don't love it, it will crush you. It will crush your soul. And people need to realize that it's not just playing games all day. And everybody who's listening to this gets that, I'm sure. The real world, normal people think it's just, fun. Isn't it fun making games? And there are times and ways in which it is fun, but it's still to this day just grueling making games. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed is everything else. My first project at Origin, I had 10 people on my team, I think. The last game I worked on, Epic Mickey 2, had 800 people in the credits. So there are cultural changes, there are communication challenges, there are vision challenges. Communication in the olden days was swivel around in your chair, look over someone's shoulder, or listen to a conversation they're having with someone else and join in. If someone was heading in the wrong direction, if they didn't understand the vision, or if they didn't agree with the vision, you could just instantly say, no. Remember what game we're making. Come back in that creative box that I set up for you. So that was a lot easier. On Epic Mickey 2, I had more producers than I had people on my team. So in the early days, everybody knew they worked for me. Once you get to 200 people, 300 people, I got to 200 people on a team decades ago. There were people on my teams who didn't know they worked for me because they got their daily direction and their employee reviews and all that stuff from a discipline lead or a producer. There were people whose names I didn't know at my own studios. I would walk by people and think, who was that? Do they actually work here? Did they sneak into the building? So communication challenges. And I mentioned the vision thing. Any game that's worth making, in my mind, is the result of someone, and I think it is someone, not some democratic group, having a picture in their head of what game they want to make. And I mean, like, I sometimes literally, but I always in some form or fashion, close my eyes at the beginning of a project when we're concepting it and imagine what the game is going to be when it's finished. And there are things in that, that come between where your team, I mean, all credit to teams. I've got to say that. I get individual credit for making these games as if, blood flows from my forehead and games come fully formed out of me. But it's all about the teams who do the real work. And teams will make you better if you let them. So you have this high level vision. You have a picture of what the game is going to be at the end. But in the middle, your team will come to you and say, you're insane. That won't work. Or how about this? This is better. And you have to be able to say, no, that doesn't fit the high level vision. Or more often, you sit there and you go, yeah, you're right. and so jumping way ahead on Deus Ex, that was probably the best example where I had an initial vision, and I actually did close my eyes and imagine what the game was going to be, and it was I can't believe I'm about to say it. It was 6 years later that the game actually shipped, and every single detail had changed from what I imagined, but it was exactly the game I imagined that I wanted to make, if you see what I mean. And that's the power of teams. But it's also the power of having a vision, because I was able to say, no, that doesn't fit. Okay. So communicating a vision is real easy when you have 10 people or even 20. But when you get to 50 or 100, or, and I hope none of you ever get to this point, 800 people, you have to work through other people. And so, I work through my studio leads, who work through their discipline leads, who work through their sub-discipline leads, who work through, and all you can do as that top level person is get things started and I hate to say reject, and accept or reject the things that make sense. You're playing constantly. You're meeting with the folks who do direct the day-to-day. And evaluating and critiquing and reviewing. And then the other big change is, like at Origin, I was the 26th employee hired there. And we were at the time self-publishing. And so we answered to no one. I mean, Origin was an amazing place. And we did what we wanted, and now it's changing now. But up until about 10 years ago, you needed a partner who would give you a lot of money and had the connections to get something printed and duplicated and put in a box and put on store shelves and promoted to potential players and all that stuff. And that means they had great input into what you were doing. Back then, like I said, if the marketing folks wanted us to do something, we would say, no, no, and we'd get away with it. Nowadays, I still say no a lot. It's amazing I still get work, but that's largely because I don't care if I make work. If I can't make the games I want to make, I'll go open a bookstore, or something. So far, I've been lucky again. But that's changed pretty radically. But the cool thing is, and this I realize I'm bouncing around a bunch, but this gets a little bit into the future of games. The coolest thing that's happening in games, and it's been growing and growing and growing over the last 5 or 10 years, is if like anybody can make a game. If you have an idea, if you have a vision and passion to do something, there's a game engine out there that you can use to make it with a very small team. And you can do it without interference and for very little money. And then there's a way to reach an audience with it, Steam and the Epic Game Store and all that. And then there's a way to make money. There's so many different business models now. So that's a real change for the better. And then finally, I promise I'll let you ask another question. Finally, finally, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what it was. Um, in 1989, and even more recently, we were just making things up. We didn't know what genres were going to work. We didn't know how to make games, schedules, QA. We didn't know. Um, and what should games play like, and what is a role-playing game, and is Chris Roberts' mad dream of making Wing Commander going to be the end of the company, or are we going to own the world? Nobody knew anything. And now, well, here's the thing. People think they know something, which is kind of dangerous. But the fact is, still nobody knows anything. We know more, and we know different. But getting back to the changes that make me hopeful over the last 5 or 10 years, there's still the opportunity to come in and say, all those guys like Warren, they're full of it. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to show them, and come up with something entirely new that changes the world of gaming. That opportunity is still there. And that's like miraculous. One of the things that has kept me going over all these years is that a new medium of expression, a new art form comes along, once or twice a century. And video games, I know, are the medium and art form of the 21st century. We are. And the opportunity to create that, which I have had, and the opportunity to grow that and help it mature and show it what it can and should be, is, even for young people listening to this, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I think people have to grab it. Don't just make a game like everybody else is making. Don't just do it to make some money, though both of those are nice. Do something that will make people forget I ever existed. I mean, go change the world, because that opportunity is still there. So that has all changed over the years, off the top of my head.
Okay, so yeah, that's a lot. I mean,
yeah, sorry. I warned you before we got out here that
it's great. Yeah, it's awesome. So let's just quickly get back to your biography for our listeners. So you joined Origin, where you worked on Ultima Underworld and Underworld 2, and this is when you met Paul Neurath. You reconnected with him later on at OtherSide Entertainment, but before this, you also was working at Looking Glass, and Looking Glass was a developer of System Shock when the Origin was a publisher, right? Mm-hmm. So you started working on this game from as a publisher, and then you transferred to developer. So that's an interesting change, from my point of view.
Yes and no. There are about 4 things in that sort of simple question. I always tell people, don't try to emulate my career path, because it involves a great deal of luck, as I have said, and because partly because I have always been willing to walk away if I don't get to do what I want. I've been able to carve out a career as what I call a creative producer. I have never been just a guy who manages budgets and spreadsheets and schedules and all of that. I've always been intimately involved in the creative aspects of the projects I've worked on. And that starts at the high level, because, like I said earlier, imitating D&D at its heart, not in its systems, is what I'm all about. And so I have supported people who share that mission, developers who share that mission, and run my own projects that express that mission and move it forward. So I did meet Paul Neurath at Origin very early. One of the first thing I did actually was work with Richard Garriott on the design of Ultima 6. We spent weeks at his palatial mansion with secret passages, dungeons, and all that stuff, eating too much Chinese food and designing Ultima 6 together. And then I worked with Paul Neurath on Space Rogue, an underappreciated game, by the way, which taught me something else. It was a hybrid of first-person space combat simulator, role-playing game, and arcade game. It mashed genres up, which I'm sure I will make sure we come back to later. And Paul asked me to craft the narrative, the branching narrative for that, which I did because I had a lot of experience doing that from Steve Jackson Games at TSR. He ultimately junked everything I did and redid it himself. I'm not sure that was necessary, but he did it. But I still loved working with him. I learned a lot. Before System Shock came along, Paul, in fact, it was Paul, came to Origin with a tech demo of a first-person perspective, real-time, fully textured dungeon. And I looked at that and said, the world just changed. That is a tool that we can use to immerse players in another world, just like Star Raiders did for me years ago. And so I ended up producing that. Again, though, I was involved in the creation of the narrative, and I spent months with the team. My wife is the most understanding woman in the world, because I moved up to Cambridge, where Looking Glass was located, and worked with the team directly up there. And the cool thing was, the first time I met those guys, I was the dumbest person in the room. And I loved that. Oh my God, those guys were smart. And they were really young and had never worked on a game, didn't know what wasn't possible. So they did the impossible. So I worked with them on Underworld. And on Underworld 2, again, I worked with them on that. And that time, part of the team worked in my office at Origin. So again, I was involved in the creative, but all credit to the team that worked on that. Again, they did the real work. And then it was System Shock, where I was so sick of working on fantasy games, characters that look like the mighty Thor or a woman in a fur bikini. I mean, swinging big swords. I was just sick of that. And so I wanted to do a science fiction game. Started working on a thing called Alien Commander, which would be a first-person perspective, real-time, fully textured game on a space station. And at the same time, Doug Church, secret master of gaming, who I've been trying to make famous for about 35 years. He won't let me, but make him famous, Doug Church. He was, and Paul Neurath were working on a science fiction game, first-person perspective, real-time 3D, set on a space station. And one day, Doug and I just looked at each other and said, why don't we just do one game? And so, to make a long story short, that's what ended up as System Shock. And that was an amazing team too. I mean, those guys, it was the core team from Underworld and Underworld 2, augmented with more people from MIT, which has some really smart tech people working for it. And so that's how System Shock came to be.
Okay, so Looking Glass.
I did ultimately become a part of Looking Glass directly, by the way. If you want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk that too.
Yeah, I was just interested, like why did you make this decision to transfer from a publisher to developer team? And I thought maybe you had some motivation beneath it.
Yeah, I left for a few reasons. Electronic Arts acquired Origin at one point while I was there, and it was interesting because for about a year they let us do what we wanted. I mean, we continued working with a great deal of autonomy, but after a while, you know, they started closing in, and all of a sudden, big company stuff started happening, and we had to grow from, I don't know what it was, 100, 200 people to 300 people. There was this concept of the producer group where each executive producer had their own teams working on their own games. I had one, Richard Garriott had one, Chris Roberts had one, Andy Hollis had one, and it got very competitive. We were all very competitive people. I mean, when I was at Origin, I very much had this attitude, unspoken, never actually talked about this there, but I was very much I'm going to show them what immersion is all about. And I'm going to show them what role playing is all about, damn it. And I'm not saying I did, but I had my own ideas about what that would be. And so I made and supported games that expressed that idea. So but the competition got really fierce and kind of unpleasant. And then I was still working with Looking Glass and Paul Neurath and Doug Church on things. And EA, one of the things they did right was they offered sabbaticals. So you get like 7 years paid time off to just recharge. And 2 weeks into my sabbatical, Paul called me up and said, why don't you just come on board? We've been working together, you know, we're great together. Just join Looking Glass. And I told him, I live in Austin, Texas. I've been here forever and I'm not leaving. And he perhaps foolishly said, well, why don't you start an Austin office for Looking Glass? And that's what I did. So I never got my 7 weeks off. And now I really want, you know, but I started working for Looking Glass, running an Austin office for them. And we worked on a bunch of interesting stuff. I built my own team, some of whom transferred over to Deus Ex later on. But I built a team that believed in my high-level mission, and I thought could express that and implement it better than I could. And so we were working on a role-playing game, a fantasy role-playing. I was back to fantasy. But anyway, a fantasy role-playing game called, very cleverly, the Austin Internet Role-Playing Game, or AIR, using the Looking Glass engine, which was in the process of transferring or being updated from System Shock to something called the Dark engine, which ultimately powered Thief. So I was working on that. And on the side, I was working on a game called Junction Point, which I later stole to name my studio, and always thought I was going to get in trouble for it, but I didn't. But Junction Point was going to be, I looked out there and at what people were doing in the massively multiplayer space, and thought, these guys are all doing it wrong. I mean, can't they see that? I'm a very frustration-driven designer. I scream at the screen when I'm playing games and think, why did they do that? I can do that better, or different. This would make this different and unique. And so I worked again with Doug and others on the design of the Junction Point massively multiplayer role-playing game. And to this day, no one's done a game like that. So either I'm really right and and people aren't seeing something else, or I'm really wrong and no one is stupid enough to fund it. I don't know which it is. But I was working on that. But then things kind of changed, and I've never done a project I was assigned to. I've always picked my own projects. And I got assigned to work on a baseball game. What? A baseball game? And I did work on that for a while, but I was not very satisfied with that. And so there came a point where Looking Glass fell on hard times. You know, I've always been, and they've always been, the kings of the cult classics. We make games that developers love, and enough gamers love that we keep getting to make more. But it's not like we've, you know, shipped a Call of Duty or a Grand Theft Auto. And so I just said to Paul, and we talked. Honestly, I don't remember if I called him or he called me, but we mutually decided to shut down the Austin office. I mean, I said it makes no sense to put the home office in jeopardy to keep this satellite thing running. And you know, I'll get another deal. It's just not a problem. And I was working on another deal. I was going to do a Command and Conquer role-playing game. And before I could sign a contract, other events came to pass that led to a completely different direction for me.
Okay, so yeah.
Just to tease you a little bit.
Okay, so like after you Looking Glass shut down, you almost signed a contract with EA, right? And there is a story that the phone rang right exactly when you were about to sign, and it was John Romero. Yeah. Who invited you and offered you almost unlimited resources and time to work on your own game at Iron Storm, and this game was Deus Ex. Yeah, and
yeah.
Yeah, this is a great story. I mean, it's a very inspiring one, and of course, it also involves a lot of luck. But I'm sure that there are a lot of creative people here in the audience who would be interested to hear how the idea of the game came to your mind, and in general, where do you get your inspiration from?
Okay, let me answer the second part first. No, I'll answer the first part first. How it happened was, yeah, I mean, I had budgets all made. I had design documents in place. I still have the budgets. I can't find the design stuff. It drives me crazy. They're somewhere, but I don't know where. And I was talking to folks at Westwood, which was part of EA, about doing that Command and Conquer role-playing game. We got to the point where we were working on contracts, and again, you said it yourself, luck. Don't try to follow in my footsteps. Make your own career. But John Romero called me up, and I had known him sort of, you know, not well, but I had known him for a while, and he had started a company called Ion Storm up in Dallas, Texas, and some of you may recall the advertisements that Ion Storm took out that read, John Romero wants to make you his bitch, which I did not approve of and never wanted to be a part of. But John said, I want you to join Ion Storm. And I said, John, it's too late. I mean, I'm close to signing this contract. And he said, don't sign that contract. I'm driving to Austin tomorrow, and I'm going to convince you to join Ion Storm. And he drove down the next day and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He said, I will give you the biggest budget you've ever had. I will ensure that there will be no creative interference whatsoever. Make the game of your dreams. you will have the biggest marketing budget you've ever had, increasing the chance that you will be able to reach an audience, and you know, build an office in Austin. So because I wouldn't move. So again, someone was foolish enough to let me build a satellite studio, and I just said, yeah, I'm in, you know. And so I kind of knew what game I wanted to make because I'd been thinking about it since 1994. That was in 1997 when John came along. In 1994, when I was still with Origin / Electronic Arts, I decided I was sick of science fiction games, and I was sick again, or still, of fantasy games. And I wanted to make a game that was really relevant to current players. And so you ask where my inspirations come from. They come from two sources. One is frustration with other people's games, and the real world. I don't believe it makes a lot of sense to try to convince people to be interested in something. That's a hard sell. So I try to find things that are in the ether, that are in, you know, in the culture, just sort of swimming around, that people are already interested in. And then I build games around that, but not well, maybe they're typical games. I don't know what's in other developers' heads. But one of the things I believe really fervently is that other media, they make statements. You know, it gets back to what I was saying before about being told a story. Someone tells you a story, whether it's in a book or a film or whatever. And games, I think, can be different. We can ask questions. We can say, how important are family and friends to you? Not, you know, me as a filmmaker saying, family and friends are important. Do you agree? And you get to say, I agree or I disagree. And that's all you get to say. That's your involvement in a book or a movie. But in a game, it occurred to me that we could ask the question and let players answer it through play. And so all of my games since then, when I had that revelation, have been based on, you know, 3 or 4 questions that the game is really, you know, really about. And so I wanted to set it in the real world and allow players to you know, express their own opinions about some serious questions. And I started thinking about that with the 1994. I started thinking about a game. Sometimes I called it shooter. Sometimes I called it troubleshooter. It was set in the real world, and you were going to play the role of Jake Shooter, a retired spy who the spy agencies came to when there was a problem that was too tough for them to solve. And that was kind of the starting point. I also, one of the early things I do is pick a role. I mean, a lot of people start with gameplay, or how does the character move, or a story. I start with real world inspiration, questions, and what role does the player play. So like in Thief, you play a thief, right? And everybody kind of gets that. So I started with that and wrote up a 200-page design document, because even as I speak too much, I write too much. And that document, I actually think it's online somewhere. I don't know how that happened, but it's basically what became or what was going to become the Command and Conquer role-playing game with the serial numbers filed off. And then it later became Deus Ex with the serial numbers filed off again. A lot of the core of Deus Ex was there largely from the start. But what quickly became apparent, again, I've said this over and over again, and I will say it to my dying breath, teams make you better. Hire people smarter than you are and let them make you look good, okay? And people on my team started, pointing out, we can't recreate the real world. Certainly in 1994, we couldn't. We still can't. And so if you put a telephone on a desk, players are going to come to that phone with expectations about how it's going to work. And it's not going to work that way because a game can't simulate that. And if there's a computer, they're going to come to that with expectations about how it works, and a car and everything else. So when the game became Deus Ex, the one of the big changes that happened is we moved it far enough in the future that people couldn't say, that's not the way a telephone works, or that's not the way prosthetics work, or DNA modification isn't that far advanced. We were just far enough advanced that we could say, shut up, that's the way it works in 2052, but not so far that the real world relevance was lost, okay? And so the vision that started with shooter got modified along the way because I learned a lot, I modified a lot, the team convinced me to modify a lot, and ultimately that was the game we made. There's way more to that story, and I'm happy to talk longer, but that's how Deus Ex got started.
Thank you so much. So talking about the real world inspiration, at GDC this year, you said that you wouldn't make such a game today because people believe in too many conspiracy theories, and this is basically what's happening in the game. Isn't it a bit sad to see how the world has changed and how the game narrative is close to what we see right now? Or maybe it is better to make more of this game to ask more questions, as you said, to people.
Wow. Getting into politics could be dangerous under any circumstances. But I will say the state of the world depresses me hugely. And a large part of that is tribalism. It's very hard for people of opposing beliefs to have any kind of nuanced conversation. People believe what they believe, whether it makes sense or not, and they can't be shaken from that belief. And a lot of those beliefs revolve around conspiracy theories that some of which may have validity, a lot of which don't. And a lot of them, again, not to get into politics too much, but they're based on geopolitical conflicts that I think are unnecessary and counterproductive. So do I think it might be useful to make that kind of game now? Honestly, I don't, because I don't believe, I believe games can generate nuanced conversation if people are open to that kind of conversation. I argue with people all the time. I love a good argument, come on, prove I'm wrong, give it to me. Let's talk about it. And I'm open to having my mind changed. But it's very hard to have any kind of nuanced conversation these days. And so making a game that's designed to encourage conversation and argumentation seems more likely to just push people apart, to support whatever belief system they carry in their heart and their head. let me give you an example of what I don't think would work these days. I was after Deus Ex shipped, I was giving a lecture at a college. I don't remember what it was about, but afterwards I did something I never do. I mean, I always go hang out with people from the audience to answer questions they didn't have time to ask and all, because I like hanging out with gamers. And I like talking about games, in case you couldn't tell. But I did something I never do. One of them invited me to go along to a bar and have some drinks. And I did. And I didn't get drunk, but some people in the audience who were from the audience did. And one of these inebriated people sat down next to me, and I'm not going to do a drunk voice, but he said, "How could you make that right-wing piece of junk?" And before I could answer, someone else came over, having overheard that, and said, "Right-wing piece of junk? It was left-wing propaganda from start to finish." And they were both right, because of the way they had played and the experience they had created for themselves, and the ways they interacted with the non-player characters. They were both right. And I got up and left because they were both drunk. But my hope is they had a conversation about that. And even if they didn't change their minds, at least they talked about why they felt that way about the game. And there are other examples of that all over the place. One of the things that makes me happiest about Deus Ex, despite my amazement that anybody cares about a game that shipped 21 years ago, that blows my mind. But if you go online where people are still talking about the game, the comments you read, the posts you read, they don't talk about how you defeated that boss monster, or wasn't it cool when JC Denton leaped across that chasm and gripped on by his fingernails and looked up and there was a dinosaur about to eat him. They don't talk about that because the game isn't about that. What they argue about is things like, how could you think that was the right state of the world at the end? How could you think that a new dark age where everybody has free will is the right answer? And someone else will respond, but everybody being connected by a sentient AI that takes over the net may compromise free will, but it means perfect peace in the world. That's clearly better. Anyway, and they have that kind of conversation, which is exactly what I wanted them to do. It's exactly it. And so to that extent, there is empirical evidence that the game succeeded, that the team bought the vision, implemented it better than I ever imagined. And the end result was exactly what I wanted it to be, generating the kinds of conversations I wanted people to have and wish people could have today. But I don't think they can.
Okay, yes, fair enough. Well, let's maybe move to more positive topics. We're actually going a little bit over time, but I was told we can stay online for as long as we want. So it just depends on for how long are you still going to have time and energy to spend with us.
I am ready to go.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, so let's then talk about Junction Point that you already briefly mentioned. This is a studio that you started, and then it was acquired by Disney. And this is when you started working at Epic Mickey franchise. So did you ever regret the decision, or not even regret, maybe was it the hard decision in the beginning to sell the company to Disney?
Hard isn't the word I would use. I started Junction Point with a very specific goal in mind, which was to work with people in other media, mostly movies, but people in other media as collaborators to create new intellectual properties that were designed from scratch to work in multiple media. Not that they would license a game property and make a Deus Ex movie, or that I would license a property and make, you know, a Dungeons and Dragons game, but that we would work together to craft something that would work in both places. And that actually was working out pretty well. I can't name a lot of the people I worked with, but I was working with some pretty big name people. I was pretty excited to be in a room with some of them. The one that came to fruition was John Woo, the film director John Woo. And he and I were working on a project called Ninja Gold. And we worked on it together. We created the characters together. I mostly crafted the story, but he had a lot of input into it. And I knew what game style it was going to be because that's all I do, you know, immersive simulation, first person perspective, you are their stuff. But we were working on it. We had a game deal. We had a movie deal. Everything was moving ahead. And then I had an agent at the time, and I had another project I really wanted to do. I keep falling back into fantasy. I don't know how that happens. An epic fantasy role-playing game set in an entirely new world, with, you know, an innovative magic system, and more player freedom than I had ever tried to offer before. So we're working on all this stuff. And to make a story as short as I'm capable of making it, one of the companies I pitched to at my agent's recommendation was Disney. And I told him, there's no way Disney is going to be interested in original properties, M-rated games. You know, they're just not going to be interested. And he said, they're changing, go talk to them. And so I did. And I pitched these properties. And sure enough, there were like 10, 15 people in the room. And they all started looking at their phones and typing on their phones and not paying attention, or so I thought. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm killing my agent when we get out of here. I told him this was a waste of time. But at the end of my pitch, one of them looked at me and said, would you be interested in doing a Disney licensed game? And I thought about it, and I've been kind of a closet Disney fan all my life. I literally have a picture of me in my mother's lap when I was 1 year old wearing Mickey Mouse ears. Okay. It goes back that far. And so I said, well, yeah. And I started going through my head, you know, what would I want to do? And I said, you want to give me the ducks? Give me Uncle Scrooge and Donald and the nephews and DuckTales, and I'm your guy. The other thing is I've always wanted to do what I call the Monster of the Week game. And they had just resurrected, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the show. Another television show that was basically the Monster of the Week. And so I said, give me that and I'll make that for you. And they said, well, how do you feel about a Mickey Mouse game? And I thought about it for about 3.5 seconds and said to myself, who says no? It was another John Romero Godfather, you know? Who says no to working with the most recognizable icon on planet Earth? I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but while I was working on Epic Mickey, I actually got a call from a Russian journalist who even over there, he said, how does it feel working with the world's leading symbol of capitalist oppression? But even in Russia, people know Mickey Mouse. I was getting pictures of kids in Africa wearing Mickey Mouse t-shirts. So I thought about this and said, I have a particular kind of game I like to make. I'm the king of the cult classics. With Mickey Mouse as my star, maybe I can get this idea, this immersive simulation idea, out to a mainstream audience. Yeah. And so I said, yeah, that sounds great. And they looked a little embarrassed, but they said, well, we have an intern group that worked up a proposal. Would you like to see it? And I said, sure, let's see it. And they showed it to me. And this intern group was really smart. I mean, that's all I can say, because what they had was, it was frankly brilliant. I mean, it was brilliant. And when they got done, all these executives said, now, you don't have to do this. You can make anything you want from scratch. And I said, why would I do that? That was genius. And then, the way I put it was, you've given me an acorn and I can grow it into an oak tree. It was the heart of an amazing game. And much of it survived, actually. It was another one of those where every detail changed, but the combination of that intern group's proposal and my personal mission in life, put it together, and you end up with what became Epic Mickey. So I went off, I worked with a designer, Alan Varney, and a programmer, Alex Duran. And we worked up yet another of my 200-page design documents and went back to Disney and pitched the game we wanted to make. And they really liked it. It went over well. And they said, we want you to make this game, but only if we acquire your studio. And I said no. I wanted to stay independent. I'd been owned by a big company before. And so all that concept work went away, or went on the shelf. And a year later, I got a call from one of those execs saying, we spent the last year trying to find somebody to execute your concept, and we don't think we've found anybody. Are you interested still? And I said, yes, I'd love to make that game. And they said, well, we still have to acquire it. And I said, no. And the next day, I'm so lucky. Oh my God. The next day, that guy flew to Austin, and we went out to dinner, and we're sitting at the bar. So maybe I was a little tipsy. He said, we want to acquire you. Here's an offer. And I looked at it, and it wasn't what I knew Junction Point would be worth someday, if I ever decided to sell. But I kind of looked at the offer and said, how many times is Disney going to come back to you and offer you the opportunity to make a Mickey Mouse game? And, I thought back, I always wanted to be an Imagineer. I was a Disney fan from when I was a kid. Here they were giving me this opportunity. And so I said yes. And they acquired the studio. It was hard the first time, and I turned it down. It wasn't hard the second time. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass on. And I have no regrets. I really am glad. And don't tell Paul Narath, my partner, oh, I guess this is being recorded. Oh, well. If they asked me to come back tomorrow, it would be very hard for me to say no.
Okay, yeah. It's quite logical considering your background and the way you liked films and animation growing up. So yeah, it's kind of logical. Well, so it worked out well. You shipped 2 successful games, Epic Mickey and Epic Mickey: The Power of Two. But after Disney, you were teaching, actually. You were teaching creative and production leadership in the University of Texas. So I have a question. If I were your student, what would you want me to know at the end of your course?
Oh my gosh. It was a year-long course. No one's ever asked me that before. I'm not sure I can sum it up. Um, well, okay, so let me back up a little bit. When Disney decided to get out of internal development and publishing, they shut down Junction and later shut down everything else. Um, and I have to say, it was devastating. Um, I I've never actually experienced something like that because it was such a great experience working for Disney, and I had some amazing plans for what I was going to do next. Oh man. Um, but so I was devastated, and I spent 9 months sitting on a couch with a remote control in my hand, just pushing buttons, watching TV. And my wife said, you have to stop doing this. And then, lucky guy, once more, I got a call from the chairman of the radio TV film department saying they wanted to start a game development program. Was I interested in building it? And I said, sure. I said, I'll make a 3-year commitment and let's do it. So I looked around and I'd done some work with the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association in the US. And one of the things that they had found was that there were over 400 institutions of higher education in the world teaching game development. 400. And I looked at a bunch of those, and they were all doing basically the same thing. They were either teaching, tech or art or design as separate things, and then having small scale projects along the way. And I said, why would I do the same thing that 400 other people are already doing? So I started thinking, where's the gap? Where's the gap? And if you remember earlier, I said, we still don't know anything. I thought about, what do we not know? And it's that we don't know how to lead projects to increase the likelihood that they're going to be great games. And how do we lead projects so those games are likely to be done in a reasonable amount of time without killing a team and without ensuring that no one ever wants to fund your next game. So that's where the focus on creative and business leadership came in. We had 20 students in the first year and 20 students in the second year. Interestingly, it was a more diverse group of people than I have ever worked with professionally. Half the people in the class both years were women, and there were several minorities and people from overseas in the class as well, which makes me wonder why we can't do that professionally. But that's a whole other story. And if I had to pick one thing, God, like I said, I've never been asked that. One of the things we did differently was we had lecture and question and answer periods in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we had all 20 of those people working on one project together. And I wanted it to feel like a studio. I wanted them to feel what it was really like. Because in those, I don't want to overstate it, in a lot of the existing programs, you work alone on some small projects, and then 2 weeks later you work with 4 people to do a little thing, and then maybe in your last semester you work on a bigger project with 8 people. And first of all, that's not the way the world works. And second of all, the existing programs, they let people get away with murder. I mean, one of the signs of being a professional is you finish things. It's not that you do cool stuff and say, well, here's as far as we got. You finish things. And so my faculty and I hired 2 people who actually had worked in the business recently. We insisted that they finish that damn project. you know, and we could enter it in contests. And the world, they would be able to go out into the professional world and say, here is what we finished, and here was my role in it. And we had a rotating leadership team, so everybody got a chance, which wasn't realistic, but I wanted everybody to get a chance to see how freaking hard leading a team is. So I think I would want people to take away a knowledge of what game development is really, really like in a real studio, and also how hard it is to make games, because it's really hard. So that off the top of my head, that's probably
Okay. Yeah. So, yep. But that's a good lesson, especially for the newcomers in the industry. So we've talked a lot about the past, and we are slowly moving to the current time and the future. In 2016, you joined OtherSide Entertainment to work with Paul Neurath again, and everybody knows that you were working on System Shock 3. So I just cannot not ask this question. What's going on? What's up with the game? Like, just everything that you can share.
Unfortunately, I can't share much. We made a partnership with Tencent, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. They were very interested in the System Shock property, and the opportunity, you know, OtherSide is an independent developer. Both Paul and I have run huge games for huge companies, and at the start of OtherSide, we both looked at each other and said, never again. Never's a big word. I mean, who knows? But we both wanted to run small teams with a lot of external partners, not necessarily outsourcers, but genuine partners who would feel like and really be part of the team. So ultimately, that's what we were working on. And, you know, our focus was on, you know, call them AAA or AA games. And Tencent came along with dreams, let's just say. And when we looked at the opportunity that we could provide the world and that they could provide the world, we entered into a partnership with them. And that is probably a little more than I should have said, and definitely all I can say.
Anyway, thank you for this.
There are exciting things coming. I will say that. Okay, I'll say that.
Okay, yeah, that's good enough for us. Also, one more piece of news that just came out, and I wanted to hear your opinion on this, that the System Shock, the remastered System Shock, is being adapted into a TV series. What do you think about it?
I know nothing about it. I know the guys at Night Dive who are working on the remaster. And I can't really speak about that either. But I know there's a deal to do a TV series. You know, we'll see. I have no idea how they're going to pull it off. I mean, one of the core tenets of System Shock is you're the hacker, not a character with a backstory and a name and a voice, and you're alone and underpowered and underprepared to deal with the things you're dealing with. And I don't know how you make a TV show where you're alone or the character is alone. So I'll be really curious. I mean, genuinely, without any judgment, I'll be really curious to see how that goes. But that's really about all I know. Oh, well, I also know that announcements are easy to make and movies and TV shows are really hard to make. I mean, there was a Deus Ex movie option years ago with a very big deal producer who I can't name. that would have been really cool. We got to the point of a third draft script that was, it was wonderful. It was so good. But it never happened, you know? So announcements are easy. Seeing something on a screen is a whole different ballgame. I kind of hope it works. I'll be watching, that's for sure. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be watching it too, for sure. Thank you so much for your answers. I still have a lot of questions in mind, but I think we should give the audience a chance to ask you some questions because I know we have some. So here is the first question from the audience. Nowadays, if critical bug exists in initial release, it's easy to make digital hotfix online and distribute it through the web. Those time, were there critical blockers on disks that were already released, and how did you fix them?
Oh man, I could get in a lot of trouble. Yeah, hot fixes are easy today. Let's just say I have mixed feelings about that. As an old school developer, and I admit I am one, I'm uncomfortable using players as beta testers. You know, I think you have to nowadays. I think there are real strengths to it, and odds are good I'm going to be doing it moving forward, but I'm going to be doing it with mixed feelings. Back in the day, we didn't have QAs, like I said earlier. We shipped games with bugs all the time. On Ultima 7 Part 2, Serpent Isle, one of the worst named games ever, we had our first complete cheat-free playthrough like 24 hours before we went beta. And I panicked about the bugs we never found because I knew they were in there. And yet, no one ever found them. People actually talked about how it was the cleanest Ultima game ever. So I just breathed a sigh of relief, never said a word until today, and went about my business. Another case on Ultima 6, I'm probably going to get some details wrong, but we shipped with a bug where the world was made up of regions, of tiles. And there was one part of the game where you had to get your party on a boat and sail across the water to another part of the game. And what we never found is if you crossed a region boundary, if you crossed a region boundary, the ship would split in two, your party would disappear, and Lord British, one of the major NPCs who wasn't even on the boat, would turn up some random place in the world as a random item, moving around and having his dialogue as a random item. And my favorite was he showed up as a decorative sword once. I loved it. How did we deal with it? We got out a fix as quick as we could. But a lot of the times, you know, we just had to say we're sorry. You know, we would ship them on discs and you know, hope people got them because we were a disc-based medium back then. You know, on Ultima 6, the executives at Origin actually came to the development area and said, this game is too big. We're going to have to ship it on a hard drive, put a hard drive in the box, you know, a 10 meg hard drive or something. It was crazy. And there was another time, I realized this isn't exactly the question, but there was another funny time where the first CDs came out, CDs, not DVDs. And we all, you know, one person, I remember who it was, held up the CD and someone said, "We'll never fill that up." And we all sort of stared at it like the apes in 2001, you know, looking at the monolith at the beginning. And we were wrong about that. We certainly filled it up and more. But no, we didn't have hot fixes. We just had to burn new disks and hope people reported that they had encountered the bug and send them to them. It was horrible.
So yeah, this is one more thing that is different in development before and now. Okay, we have one more question, and I think it will be a really great one to finish our conversation today. If you could go back in time to the beginning of your professional career, which advice would you give to yourself?
God, you know, I've never been asked that either. I'm going to buy myself some time and tell you what I would tell somebody else based on what I've learned in my career. And then I'll try to think of an answer to that very good, very tough question. I would tell other people that education is more important than you think, and having a life is more important than you think. If someone comes to me and says, you know, if I ask them, what do you do, you know, for outside of work? If they say, I play games, that's kind of the end of the interview. I want to work with people who have a broader range of interests than that, because they will bring their unique perspective to the games they work on. As far as education goes, there's a tendency to focus on STEM, you know, science, whatever, you know, tech. I can't remember what STEM stands for now. I'm pathetic. Anyway, there's a tendency to specialize within technology or design or art-oriented skills. And that's okay, because if you're going to work at a big company, specialists are kind of what we look for now, not generalists. If you're working at a small company on an indie project, generalist equals good. But beyond that specialty, it's surprisingly important not to miss out on the humanities. Parents love me for saying this. Would-be developers hate me for saying this. But a knowledge of history is important. A knowledge of behavioral psychology is important. Economics is important. Communication skills, written and oral, are important. And I mean, like, I've had to know the difference between an inline engine and a radial engine in World War I biplanes. I've had to know how a medieval castle works on a day-to-day basis. I've certainly needed to communicate with a variety of audiences in a variety of ways. What we do to a large extent is exploit psychology of players, and economics is obviously important to design. So you never know what you're going to need to know. So having the broadest base of knowledge you can possibly acquire is hugely important. As far as what I would tell myself, wow. Okay, this is not, I suspect, the answer people want to hear, but one of the things that's almost universally true, not universally true, but when you make your hobby, or even, you know, your obsession, your profession, a lot of your creative energy goes into the development of new things for other people to enjoy. And what you will find, a lot of people, and I admit, including me, you will spend less time playing games. And you will play games in a different way. And I didn't realize any of this. I said earlier, I'm a frustration-given designer. And that's true. I find it hard to turn off the critical part of my brain and just enjoy a game. uh, you know, I constantly pick it apart and look at what they've done right that I can use, what they've done wrong, uh, and what I think needs to be done better. So a lot of the time, what I do, and this is not good. I do what I say, not as I do. I find myself playing 2 hours, 3 hours of a game, and then saying, "Okay, I've learned everything I'm going to learn from this game. There are too many games out there. I'm done." And so you have to think long and hard about that. Are you going to be one of those people? And there are a lot of us out there. And do you want to just be someone who plays games for the rest of your life? Because those two things, you know, playing games and making them don't always go together all that well. So be aware of that. One other thing, I learned this early on, and it's kind of self-taught, so it's kind of obnoxious to say it out loud, I guess. But we are still a young medium. I kind of alluded to that earlier, and we're not a solved problem. If you look at movies, you know, at least up until the days of video, you know, and CGI and all that stuff, the position of the sprocket holes on a film hadn't changed in 125 years. And the way animation worked, cell animation worked, hadn't changed since 1920. And the way you record sound hadn't changed dramatically or in any substantive way since 1930. And games are not like that. There's still an opportunity to change the world. And I think it's important that we try. And that's why one of the rules at my studios is every game has to have one new thing. Here are the capital letters, one new thing that no one in the world has ever seen and done before. And in that way, we move the medium forward. And if we don't, if we just imitate other media or imitate ourselves, I think there's still a chance we're going to be a flash in the pan and not the medium of the 21st century that we can and should be. That's the best I can do. I'm going to think about that. Thanks, whoever asked that, because now I'm not going to get any work done today.
Okay, so thank you so much for answering that, and thank you for being with us, Warren. It was an amazing chat, and thanks to everyone for asking your questions. I know you guys have more, but you can ask them in Pine, and we run out of time. So thank you again for being here with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'll try to get on Pine and see if there are more questions, but I don't know if I'll be capable of doing that. So we'll find out.